What about scrapes and licking branches?
Yep.
You like to use those to locate deer preseason?
Oh, absolutely. At all time, all year round. It's there are times throughout the year, and I won't go too far into this because I know we're going to talk about it. I do agree there's a certain time frame in hunting season in any state where there's going to be a peak in scrape activity. However, even this time of year, as I got a lot of cameras on scrapes, rarely do I get a buck that I can tell just is randomly walking by that scrape and pays no attention to it. Now, I will say, and this is what some hunters have yet to understand, is I bet you only 40 or 50% of the time, maybe less, a mature buck actually goes to the scrape. I totally believe that they walk by scrapes, they get downwind of scrapes, they can smell a scrape from 20 yards away, even whether there's wind blowing in their direction or not. They can smell what deer have been in that area. And I think that's more of the concern this time of year. Not so much marking their territory, maybe a little bit when I say they go on that summer rut excursion, but they're mostly just interested of who's been around, or they're not marking. I mean, they'll work scrapes some, don't get me wrong, but it's way more of just seeing who's been around and putting their name tag on that by working that licking branch. That's what I think happens more than dispersing their own scent on it. I really do.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so do you try to set up your cameras on those scrapes in a way where you're not just looking at the scrape, but you're trying to see maybe beyond it to a faint trail that's 20, 30, maybe 40 yards behind it?
Absolutely. And sometimes if I feel in that location there's a predominant wind, I even think, okay, this buck is a lot, or any deer, bucks in general. It even happens with all deer, but especially mature bucks. It's very likely every time I get a buck coming through here, he's not even going to come to this scrape. He doesn't need to. There's generally a southwest wind here. If it's consistent, I'm going to face that camera to where it's watching downwind of that scrape. I've seen bucks as far out as my cameras can detect with their nose pointed right at that scrape. And there's no doubt in my mind that, I mean, think about it. If you had a nose as powerful as a white-tailed deer, would you walk the extra 50 feet if you didn't need to? You're just walking by, okay, they're gone. And sometimes they mark their scent, but I really think most of the time they don't. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, that's something that I've started to learn these last couple of years, especially putting a lot more cameras on big scrapes. Is a lot of times the big bucks are not necessarily the ones walking up and thrashing it. I mean, they do every once in a while, but a lot of times I'll get them in the background. Especially if I find a faint trail back there, they'll be way behind the camera.
Yep.
And you gotta like really zoom in to see what they are because they're kind of off through the woods. And that's not ever something that I've really set up my cameras to look at.
Yep.
It's always been accidental. So that's really interesting. That's good information. Now, when it comes to finding scrapes, again, talking maybe preseason here, if you're walking around in the woods, middle of August, and you find a little scrape from last year,
Yep.
what about that scrape tells you this is a scrape you should pay attention to, or this is one you should maybe just write off and keep going?
Well, first of all, I will say before we answer that, I would say right now, given the amount of greenery in the woods, it's very hard to look on the floor, the forest floor, and even find a spot still trampled up from last year, because throughout the summer, they're actually not working scrapes with their hooves, that heavily. What I usually look for is the overhanging branch, and usually what you'll find is this big green overhanging branch, but then a couple strands of dead leaves or something dead hanging down. Like, especially looking for dead leaves connected to a branch vertically hanging down from an overhanging branch. That's the sign of a scrape even from last year, and chances are they're still working it. I never get too excited when I find scrapes around food sources. I'll hunt them a little bit during the rut. Once again, I won't go too heavy on that, but my point is I like to find scrapes either on travel routes or near or within bedding range or bedding areas, because those locations are more consistent from year to year. I get a little bit more excited. They're usually harder to find though. Like I'll walk out in Oak Ridge, a lot of times I'll see 10, 15 big scrapes because it was loaded with acorns the year before. I'll go around a thicket that I know is good for bedding, and I'm lucky to find one scrape. But that one scrape could be the best scrape you're going to find in that whole area. Especially, and another thing that I find is when these deer come out of these bedding areas, especially with a full belly, they're not, once again, running to that Oak Ridge yet. They've probably been isolated all day, and they want to maybe place their scent on that scrape next to that bedding area, or see what other deer have kind of been fringing in on their core area, because going into hunting season, they're going to be way more aggressive and concerned about other intruders. So I think scrapes around bedding, or the scrapes along travel routes, especially if you're a rut hunter, just walking good solid terrain features and heavily used trails, and then all of a sudden it leads to a big scrape. I mean, those are great finds during this stages of the rut when bucks are covering a lot of ground. Those can be great spots as well.
You're not overly interested in the scrapes around food sources. You want to find the ones around the bedding. But is there anything physically about that scrape when you're standing there looking at it that tells you, like, oh, it needs to have a bunch of different licking branches, or it needs to be a big giant scrape on the ground, or anything visually about the scrape that if you just walk across one in the woods, you're like, oh, this would be a good one?
As far as a good one, meaning like how active it is, are you saying? Or usually your most active scrapes that have been used year after year, there's going to be a few different features to look at. Number one is go ahead and look back up on the overhanging branch. You should see where over the years there's been spots on that branch where other branches have been ripped off. Just little spots where it looks like it got severed 3 years ago. You're going to probably find 3, 4, 5, or some number in that area of like, okay, there's no branch on the ground, but yet I can tell that there's been other branches here throughout the years taken right off. I mean, I always start with the licking branch. Secondly, I think it's the amount of root activity in that scrape. Like when you look in that scrape and you start to see, it's 3-4 inches deep and roots is bigger around than your finger, because once you start digging 3 or 4 inches into the soil, that's when you start getting into the root system. That's going to tell you that most likely that scrape's been getting pawed out for years, versus there's many scrapes that, especially after the leaves have fallen and, here in late November, I've seen bucks with my own eyes make scrapes 5 feet wide. I kid you not, just standing there for 5 minutes, just scraping, and they look massive, but yet all he did was take away that upper layer of leaves. And the size of the scrape isn't always an indicator of how active that scrape is. It's more, once again, how the depth, the root exposure, and as well as, have you seen where multiple licking branches have completely gotten taken off, severed, throughout the years?
Yeah, that kind of answered part of what I was going to ask, but like with this looking for licking branches, because you're not really necessarily seeing the scraping activity in the summertime where you can identify, like, for a fact it's a scrape. It's more so a licking branch. I call Andrew, he's Mr. Hawkeye over here, because we'll be walking through the woods and he'll see a licking branch from 90 yards away just hanging down.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna scrape. I'm like, what are you looking at? And finally I'll see it, but I'm down where I'm looking for snakes more so than not. But the success of getting inventory of bucks on licking branches in the summertime, I think doesn't get talked about enough, because that's something that Andrew's had a ton of success with the last couple of years in a couple different areas, midsummer, late summer, getting bucks come through, batch groups and individual bucks hitting licking branches. And just to kind of reiterate, that's still a factor for you, something that you'll still look for a little bit in the summertime. And that's one thing that I think Andrew's kind of asking. I don't know if it was, nothing against Andrew was asking the right way. But is there a certain licking branch where if you find a scrape in the summer, or a licking branch in the summer, not a scrape, but just a licking branch in the summertime, that gives you confidence you can get a buck on at that time of the year versus later in the fall? Is there any kind of characteristics you can see in the summertime to have more confidence in it?
Yeah, I honestly just think the best summer scrapes are the ones most conducive to their summer needs, the right summer habitat. Once again, temperature, water, like if it's in the area of where they're heavily traveling, heavily using, they're going to pound scrapes within that small area. Once again, it's not going to be peak scrape season, but I have scrapes right now, and no joke, where I'm getting bucks every day. Like, I have cell cams on scrapes, and there's rarely a day I don't get one buck. Sometimes 5 or 6. Now, I'm not saying that I'm getting 30 different bucks throughout the summer, but that same bachelor group of 5, 6, 7, 8, every day some of them are hitting that scrape. There's some days they all hit it, and it's just something they're going to very consistently. And so it just goes to show that, at least more in the earlier part of summer, I don't think they have a care in the world about maybe who's boss or I want to fight this guy for that. I think it's more just a communicational type thing, a socialization. But pretty soon, I think you'll see some differences. You'll start to see, come mid to late August, they're going to start tearing the ground up. You're going to see they're urinating in those scrapes a little bit more. I mean, it's all going to change. But wherever bucks are concentrated, you're going to find scrapes. No matter what time. Even in the winter, I get bucks pounding scrapes in certain areas.